So those of you, we know Zoom now, we have to agree to be recorded. Great, so let's get started. Welcome to this March Qualitative Working Group workshop. So nice to have so many people on this call. Thank you so much for signing up for this workshop. Today we'll be on for an hour and a half for a Dedoose training. And I just want to say like a huge shout out and thank you to our presenters. In late, I think it was late January, Julia McCoy, who is my co-conspirator in the Qualitative Working Group, we do all of the organization of the seminars and workshops. She put out a call to our collaborators on the Qualitative Working Group listserv. So many of you are experts and many of you don't have expertise and you're eager to learn. So we have a really wide variety of people on the listserv. But she asked if anyone would be willing to do this Dedoose training. And so Imogen and Hawley got in touch with us and said, yes, I will. Myself and my colleagues will do this. So thank you for stepping up, Imogen. I know you and I have been the one to correspond, but you are bringing along Ariana, Katz, and Mary-Kate Shapley-Quinn. So this is great. We're going to have 3 Dedoose experts in this training. And they come to us, they're going to introduce themselves in a minute, but I just want to tell you that as you see here, they're from RTI International. They're based in Berkeley, not in North Carolina. And they are affiliated with the Women's Global Health Imperative. And they are all qualitative researchers. They are project coordinators. And like so many of us, they are studying sociobehavioral issues as they relate to HIV prevention and treatment. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Imogen, and thank you all so much. Really appreciate this.
Thank you, Kim, and thanks also to Julia. I'm not sure if she's on the line yet, but thanks for this opportunity to introduce you all to Dedoose. I'm Imogen, and like Kim said, I'm joined by Mary-Kate and Ariana. In the way of an introduction, I wanted to give you a little bit more background just on our research team. Like Kim said, we're from the Women's Global Health Imperative team at RTI International. Our whole team is comprised of about 18 and soon to be 20 researchers who focus on epidemiologics, biomedical, sociobehavioral, and implementation research, mostly on HIV prevention and health or well-being challenges that intersect with HIV. And I've listed some examples of our research here, including that sociobehavioral research that Kim mentioned on the acceptability and adherence to HIV prevention and treatment strategies like PrEP or ARVs. We also do end-user research on new biomedical products like implants for HIV prevention or contraception. And some of our team members do mixed methods and community-based, community-engaged research on PrEP implementation. So if you would like to learn a little bit more about us, then you can visit our webpage at rti.org. And then before we get started with walking through Dedoose, I thought that in case anyone is unaware, Dedoose is a web-based application used for qualitative and mixed methods research. It recently switched from being a website online-only platform to a free downloadable desktop application. And it includes functions for all of the basic steps in qualitative analyses, including uploading data, coding, exporting coded excerpt reports, tagging data with descriptors, and writing memos. There's also functions for automating graphs and charts in your projects, and a way to run inter-rater reliability tests, which I know some of the attendees are particularly interested in. So these are all things that we're going to go through today in this training. Ariana is going to start us off with a look at Dedoose versus NVivo, for those of you who are more familiar with the NVivo platform. And then I'll cover some of these different capabilities that I just mentioned before Mary-Kate shows us those examples, some examples of those things in Dedoose. And then we're going to all let you try it out for yourselves in a demonstration project. So while I'm going through some examples later, if you ever see this expand icon, that indicates something that Mary-Kate is going to go over as an example in Dedoose later and give you kind of a walkthrough. So if you're not completely understanding it as we go along in the slides, don't worry, we'll give you a chance to see it in real life later on. And also, like Mary-Kate mentioned, as people were joining, if you haven't done so already, please add your email address that is linked to your Dedoose account or your free trial into the chat box, because we're going to be copying those into a Dedoose demonstration project so that you can all walk us through something together later on. Now, first, I think Ariana is going to take it away with just some comparisons between Dedoose and NVivo for those of you who are more familiar with the latter.
Yeah, thanks, Imogen. So a few years ago, our team had been using NVivo for all of our projects, and we were having some challenges. And so we were looking to make the switch. And I think at the time it was Mary-Kate and myself and maybe one other analyst and coordinator did some deep diving and thinking about the differences. And we had never used Dedoose before, maybe one person had it. And so we created something like this chart, which I realize there's a lot on here, but actually, Imogen, if you can just do the animation next. These were sort of the yellow boxes are the main pros for Dedoose that we sort of ended up thinking through. And so as you can see on the left hand side here, we have all these different capabilities from both the softwares, and the teamwork for Dedoose is just because of the cloud-based, it made it a lot easier. I'll talk about that more in a second. Excuse me. The codebook creation can be in both Excel and then you import it, or it can be done in NVivo. And actually, just a quick caveat is that this comparison, like I said, this was a few years ago. So this was NVivo 11, or actually, I think we were even in 10 at that point. And so maybe some things have changed. We completely switched to Dedoose. So it's possible that NVivo has updated some things that I'm not aware of. One of the other, so besides codebook creation, there was also these, they're called case classifications in NVivo, but in Dedoose, they're called descriptors. We felt like that the importing was, again, easier, and the data filtering was quite easy. And then one really big one for us was just customer support. We had a lot of challenges getting a hold of NVivo. They're not based in the US, so the time zone was different, but then also just there wasn't really someone who was just able to pick up the phone and help us. Whereas Dedoose is actually based in Los Angeles, where Liz and I are both based, but either way, same time zone with California, and they're incredibly easy to reach. I mean, I've now met them too at a conference, and we're on like first name basis, and they answer the phone, they'll answer your email. They're very connected. So, and because it was web-based, also one of the benefits of Dedoose is they can make changes a lot faster. And so we actually will make suggestions or tell them about bugs or whatever there is, and they can push out a new version a lot easier than when it's a project. One other thing with NVivo is they do have a collaborative version, and I'm blanking on the name right now, but and we looked into that. There were some issues there in terms of their security protocol, like what they required us to have to do. It was going to basically create the same challenges for us, we felt like, and because of the cost, which I actually don't even have on here. Cost is also a huge one. Dedoose is quite affordable. And so also if you're collaborating with any international teams like we do, if your project can't cover, it is quite affordable. So other people can join. You can go to the next slide, Imogen. And then one more. Yeah, so our main reason really for switching was the teamwork aspect. I have not fond memories of handling a project where I had like 6 different analysts, 6 different coders, and I had so many projects with NVivo, and just managing that. And every time you had to update a code book to have to create an entirely new project, it was just super cumbersome, and created actually some user error because things would not necessarily merge correctly or whatever it was. So that was our main reason for switching, and why we've sort of stayed using Dedoose. And then one more, Imogen. We could talk about all these differences all day long, and if you ever have questions, or if you want to type something in the chat, we can follow up with any of some more details about any of these capabilities. But the one that I'm going to talk about for a second is the iterator reliability. As you can see, I guess I didn't explain the icons, but kind of thumbs up is sort of, and thumbs down are sort of self-explanatory, and then the little dash is sort of like, they were sort of equal, or it was sort of like not great or not horrible. They were just fine. And so for us, the iterator reliability for both programs were just sort of, they're fine. They serve their functions, but they are quite different. So Imogen, if you go to the next slide. So the iterator reliability tests, you would use this especially in Dedoose if you are required or you want a kappa score. So I know, at least in our group, we've been discussing more and more the purpose of the kappa and whether we really need it, and maybe you don't for all of your projects, but if you do, what Dedoose has is this training test center. And so basically the idea is that you have one trainer, and that can be one person in your project, or what we often like to do is we rotate, each time we do an iterator reliability test, a different coder will be that trainer. And so you're sort of you're testing the other coders against different people, but you can kind of choose to do it how you would want. And they would just choose certain excerpts that they've already coded, and then the other coders would take a test on those excerpts that they've already coded. So it's not, so in NVivo, the difference is that coders will code an entire transcript together, and then they create a score. And in Dedoose, you are just looking at excerpts, so certain excerpts. So that's one of the big differences. And I just have on here what the difference in terms of the kappa agreements interpretation is here. So just so you have that as a reference. And we've found for Dedoose that it's kind of really helpful to focus, because you're just doing it on certain excerpts. It is really helpful to focus on what we call key codes, or codes that are most relevant to the research topic at hand. And it works best as well, excuse me, if you are using it on excerpts, or sorry, for codes that have a specific application criteria, meaning they're not as inductive. So it's like, if they really need to be well defined, because if there's one where there's a lot of range, you're just going to get a low kappa score, and that's not really going to tell you about your agreement. So there's some challenges there. I think I will stop there and pass it along, and we can answer any questions that come up along the way.
Yeah, thank you, Ariana. I was just about to say, I know this is a topic that some people were really interested in discussing. So if you do have more questions about the IRR test, then we would be happy to answer those later on. In the meantime, I want to go over a little bit of language that I'm going to be using to describe the whole walkthrough in Dedoose first, just so we're all on the same page. When I use the term media, that refers to any type of data that you're uploading to Dedoose. In most cases, that might be transcripts from interviews or focus groups, but there may be other types of qualitative data that you're using with that you could upload to your project. Excerpts, when we say that, what we mean are the selections of text that you are applying codes to. And codes are those labels or tags that you apply to an excerpt that represent a topic or theme from your codebook. Memos are analytical notes about the data that you can link to an excerpt or to a whole piece of media or data as part of your analytical process. So I'm going to be using these terms a lot as I walk through the rest of Dedoose. And in sharing the ins and outs of Dedoose, I think that one of the most important things to know to kind of navigate through the platform is that it's laid out like a series of pages with this row of tabs on the top of the page that you can flip through. So the first tab is the home page. This is a sort of bird's eye view of your whole project. So here you'll see a quick overview of all of the data that you've uploaded to your project, your codebook, excerpts that you've created in your media, as well as those graphs and charts that I mentioned Dedoose automates. And there's also shortcuts on the homepage represented by these plus symbols to upload new types of media or data, as well as to create new codes to your codebook. The second tab in Dedoose is the Codes tab. This is another place where you can add codes to your codebook either manually, or you can upload a completed codebook by importing an Excel spreadsheet. We'll go over that a little bit more later and show you how it's done. You can also add definitions to each of your codes here, and you can move your codes around in order, including nesting codes as child codes or grandchild codes. If you aren't familiar with what that means, it's like having a code within a code. So if I wanted to explore a topic like attitudes might be my core parent code. But within that, I might want to be more specific and have child codes for positive attitudes. That would be a child code, or negative attitudes could be another child code. So there's a way to kind of create a structure in your codebook that way. Moving along, the media tab is another place other than the home page where you can upload data. Dedoose allows you to upload text data, like I mentioned, transcripts, or other types of textual data, as well as visual and audio data. You can adjust the file names of your media here, and you can filter your media to view a limited data set based on a range of variables, including the length of data, the descriptors of the data, or who uploaded it, etc. Then next, the excerpts tab will show you all of the excerpts that have been created in your project once you've created them. So as a reminder, excerpts are the sections of text that you apply codes to. When you start a new project and you've uploaded your media, there won't be anything in this tab. This is really a most useful place to go once you do have coded data, because you can use this section of Dedoose to filter your data based on the codes or other variables that you have in your project, and then export those as code reports, either to Word documents or in Excel. We will be showing an example later of how to filter all of this data too. The descriptors tab allows you to create sets of descriptors or these descriptive variables, like I mentioned earlier, and link them to your media. So, for example, you might want to label your transcript with a descriptor like your participant age, or where they're from, or what their gender is, something like that, based on whether, like, if you wanted to stratify your analysis based on those variables later. So then whenever your media comes up, you'll see whether it has a descriptor added to it, and you can view pretty simply what those descriptors are. In the Analyze tab, that's what I mentioned earlier, where Dedoose will automate graphs and charts for you based on the data, the codes, and the descriptors that are created in your project. Again, these are generated once you have things in your project. So when you go in that in an empty project, there won't be anything in this section on this tab. Some of the chart options are specifically catered to mixed methods research. So there's for instance, a descriptor t-test or a descriptor ANOVA. Our team doesn't have a lot of experience using those functions in Dedoose, but we do, however, love to use this example I have here of the code co-occurrence heat map chart. This allows you to see how many times any code has been applied in your project, and also where it overlaps with other codes. So you can see where codes are being applied at the same time to the same excerpt. Does that make sense? But there are many, many other charts and graphs in this tab that you can explore, and hopefully we'll have a chance to do that later. The Memos tab is a pop-up page that allows you to view and group memos that you've created on any excerpt. As a reminder, memos are notes that you write about an excerpt in your analytical process. I like to think of them as post-its, and in Dedoose they look like post-it notes. A memo group might be used to capture all memos related to a certain theme or topic in your analysis. You can also, in this memo tab, search for keywords that are in your memos, and then also select memos to export into a Word document. We often do that on our team to synthesize grouped memos into a summary report. So you can imagine if you were writing an excerpt memo, a series of excerpt memos on a certain topic, you would put them all into the same memo group and then later export that whole memo group into a Word document, and you have a whole report on what you found on that topic. The training tab is where you will find the iterator reliability tests that Ariana mentioned earlier. Those buttons that you create and to take those tests. And I don't think we went over this in much detail, but there are two options for the types of tests that you create. One is a code application test that helps you evaluate how users apply codes to excerpts. It'll show you excerpts that you, as a user, have to decide which codes you would apply to that excerpt. And that's the type of test that our team usually uses. There's also an option here to do a code weighting test, which is for users to assign weights or ratings to codes that have already been applied to an excerpt. If you do have questions about that, like I said, we can go over that in a little bit more detail later. The security tab is a page to add and remove users to your Dedoose project, and also to change the level of security settings or permissions for each user. So for example, you could choose to make it so that some users can only apply codes to excerpts, but they can't change the codebook, or you could change a user's security settings so that they can only view the project, but they can't change anything in it, if that would ever be useful. And then the dataset tab is also a pop-up page like the memo page. This is where you can filter your data set so that you can see a kind of limited version of everything that you've uploaded into your project. So this would be useful if you wanted to stratify your analysis and have a way to sort of only view what is in your limited data set based on that strata. The way you would do that would be to filter the data in another tab, like the media tab or the excerpts tab. And then there's an option on those pages to click make set. And then you would come back to this data set page and save it as a set with a new name and a description. Once you do that and you load that new data set, it will automatically change the graphs and charts that Dedoose automates in the Analyze tab. So that can be a nice way to kind of do a new visualization based on the stratification of data that you selected. Lastly is the Projects tab. This is just where you're going to see all of the projects that you have or are a user on in Dedoose. So when you open up Dedoose later, you will see a new project added here for our demonstration page that we're our demonstration project that we're adding you to. And this is also where you would set up a new project. There's an option at the lower right corner that says Create Project. And then from that, a little pop-up box opens that allows you to title and describe your new project and then submit it. So from here, I'm going to go in a little step-by-step on how you as a new user in Dedoose would start your project. Once you've created that title and a description for your project, you might go into the Security tab and add new users, and then you would need to start adding your media. So again, there are two ways to do that. The first is on the home page, where you can click the plus symbol button on the media box, and then click on data, the type of data that you want to import. It'll open up a little file box for you to select files from your computer. The other option is to go into the media tab and then import data from there. Again, using that plus symbol on the upper right corner. And then once you have all of your data uploaded into the project, or at least some of your data, you will need to add your codebook if you're going to be doing any coding. So again, you can do this either manually, like I mentioned, by going to the codes tab or on the home page and adding codes one by one by pressing that plus symbol, and then manually typing in the code and its description. The other way to do this is to import a codebook from Excel by clicking the import codes button on the information page in the codes tab. This is a little bit tricky to go over. I think that I might need a little bit of assistance here to describe it from Ariana or MK, but sorry, no, Kate. But here I have an example of the type of layout you'll need in Excel in order to upload it and have Dedoose read kind of what's in that Excel spreadsheet properly. So the way to do this is to have an ID number for all of your codes, if it's a parent code, and if it's a child code, it will not only have a new ID number, but also an ID number for the parent. So an example of that is listed here as counseling. It would use the parent code ID as well as its new own ID. And then the depth indicates that it's a child code or a grandchild code. So a depth of 1 would be a child, a depth of 2 would be a grandchild. And that's, a grandchild is a code nested in a child code as well as a parent code. If you can think about it as like a tree. Ariana or Mary-Kate, would you add anything here?
I would just say that it looks more complicated than it is. They have the templates for you, and once you've done it once or twice, it's actually quite straightforward and really easy. MK?
I made a super simple demo codebook for this training today, so I could show you. It has like 6 codes in it, and we'll upload it together, so you'll see it then, and maybe it'll make sense as well.
Thanks. Okay. Next, I'm going to move along to coding. So you have your media, you have your codebook, you can start coding. You will do this by opening up a piece of media, a data type, by double clicking it either in the media page or the home page. And then the way to create an excerpt is just to click and drag your cursor over the text that you want to create into an excerpt and apply codes to. Once you have that selected excerpt, by highlighting it, you can add codes in 2 different ways. There's kind of 2 ways to everything in Dedoose. The first is to just right-click on that highlighted text and select Add Codes. And then you can either from there drag codes into this box that says Selected Info. It's in red here. From your codebook listed below it, or by double-clicking on codes in the Quick Code pop-up box. This is something we'll go over as well in Dedoose, so you can see it done. And then an important thing to note about coding in Dedoose is that you don't want to overlap your code, your excerpts in Dedoose. It leads to it being kind of messy and cumbersome when you are exporting those code reports later. That was mentioned, I think, as one of the comparison items in the Dedoose versus NVivo tables that you saw. So here you can see the way that we typically code is back to back by making the point where one excerpt ends, the point where another one begins, so that there isn't any overlapping. Of course, a lot of teams have different ways of coding. You might be coding much less than everything in your transcript or data type, and only coding kind of the most relevant information. So just a note here is that it makes things easier if you don't overlap your excerpts. There's a way to adjust the length of an excerpt if you need to by clicking on the bracket next to the highlighted text. That will kind of select that excerpt. And then you can right click and select either set excerpt start or set excerpt end to adjust the length. You can also from there delete the excerpts or codes that are applied to it by using that X button on the selected info box. I have that listed here as well. So if you just click on the X, it will get rid of them.
Imogen, can we pause for 1 second? Because Kim asked a question in the chat that Mary Kate, I'm hoping you can answer because you always explain it well. The question is, can you say more about why it's easier to not overlap? And we have talked about this ad nauseum. Mary Kate, I'm hoping you can make sense of it.
Yeah, and this, for the way I code, this is the problem. If you code like this chunk with code A and B, and this chunk that overlaps with code B and C, Dedoose can't understand that like this chunk pertains to both, so it pulls them separately. So this like overlapping chunk, if you pull code B that's in both, it pulls it once as this and then again as this. So in your code report, you're getting things that like you're getting the same chunk of data twice, basically, where it overlaps, which I find to cause extra work and to be super inefficient. It also means sometimes that you pull things along with it that you don't necessarily want or need.
And it screws up the visualizations because it's misreporting and miscalculating. And so if you're trying to use some of the visualizations to make some first pass decisions, then it's inaccurate.
I don't know if your teams ever export coded transcripts into Word documents, but if you aren't overlapping them, the codes show up in comment bubbles really nicely. But if there is overlap, those comment bubbles tend to get pretty wonky.
I would just add one thing. This was the biggest shift for us, I would say. I didn't mention it in our comparison, but I would say this was like the hardest thing to get our heads around when we made the switch. But now that we do it, it feels very natural. So it is sort of a mental jump. And then, and so you end up just having to think more carefully about your excerpt chunks, which is why being able to adjust them as you go definitely is a key. So get comfortable with that because you will need to do that.
Yeah, I saw Kim, you had a question about the resizing of excerpts. It might be helpful if we can add that as an example later in our walkthrough, so kind of show you how we do it. I see there's also a question that just came up about how to add data once you've coded.
Yeah, I was going to ask for some clarity if you want to keep going, and I'll manage the chat. Okay.
Thanks. Okay, I'm going to move along. The next thing I wanted to go over was memoing. So memos, like I said, these are kind of the notes that you can take during your analytical process. Memos can be added to an excerpt the same way that codes are added, either by right-clicking on the selected excerpt and then clicking Add Memo. And then from there, a memo box will open up and allow you to title the memo, assign it to a group, and then write the memo and save it. There is another way to do this. If you're in the excerpts tab, you can click on memos that are listed next to each excerpt. And then from there, a memo box will pop up and you could write excerpt memos that way. I like that option, especially if you are filtering your excerpts based on codes. Then you could write excerpts only on coded excerpts, excerpts coded with something specific across all of your media, rather than going into one type of media and writing excerpt memos that way. Again, that's something that we can show if it's useful. And then just a note here about the titling of memos. Dedoose will auto-populate the title with the first little chunk of text that is part of your excerpt. So you can just delete that and add in your own title. Our team tends to use kind of a titling convention that uses the participant identifier and then something about the either the range of text that you've selected or something specific to the type of memo that you're writing. And that helps later to be able to sort through your memos if you're doing a lot of them. So just something to keep in mind, might be useful. And then one of the last things I wanted to mention is filtering coded data. Let's say you've coded all of your data and you want to add memos, like I said, only to specific excerpts coded with certain codes. Then you would go to the excerpts tab and open up this list of codes that comes up on the left side of your screen. And then from there, you can select the codes that you want to filter by. And beneath that, in the filters, choose true or false, depending on whether or not you want that code applied to the excerpts that you're filtering. So in this example, I hope you can see, I have disclosure coded. That's one of the codes that I've selected false for, and then health with the selection of true. So in this instance, I would see all of the excerpts that have health, but are specifically not also about disclosure or don't have disclosure applied to those excerpts. There are, I think, great capabilities with this method. It allows you to come up with some pretty savvy combinations. You can get very specific topics this way. And filter through a lot less data if you're running code reports. So some of the things that I didn't go over in much detail are the descriptors, adding descriptors to your media, and then creating and taking those IRR tests. Those are just a little bit more complicated, and I didn't want to run out of time. However, we can show you those later during our kind of walkthrough in the project together. Or Dedoose has a really great user guide online that gives fantastic how-tos of all of their functions. So we really recommend using that if you ever need a quick lesson on how to do something that we haven't covered. And then I wanted to just post our emails here in case you do have any questions in the future about some of the things we've gone over. Feel free to email us or check out our webpage again. And now, before we address any questions, I'm going to hand it off to Mary-Kate for a walkthrough in Dedoose. And let's see, I'm going to stop sharing, and then Mary-Kate, maybe we can start from there.
Yeah, I've been in Dedoose furiously adding your emails to a test project, so hopefully it's worked. And Destry and Shweta, I haven't been able to get yours in yet. And Ariana and Imogen, if anybody mentions in the chat that they haven't gotten in, will you help troubleshoot that as I move forward? Thank you.
Yes, let's do that.
Great. So I'm going to share my Dedoose, and so that we're doing a walkthrough together. Can you see my Dedoose screen? Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
this is a totally blank project. I wanted to do some first things first about populating a project, the basics. So I've pre-chosen a few media files, and as I said, I made like a fake code book just for us to use for this project. So if you're in Dedoose and you see that test project I've added you to, that project already has these documents added. I'm just doing it from the blank slate here so you can see how it's done if you're brand new to Dedoose. As Imogen and Ariana mentioned, usually in Dedoose there's more than one way to do something. So I'll show you one way. There's other ways as well for almost everything. For adding media, you know, I'm going to actually share my whole screen, not just my Dedoose, so that I can show you when it pops up other windows, because I will need to access my file. Okay, so the plus button usually means a way to add something. So I'm going to do the plus button for media. I want to show you both how to import text and import PDFs. I'll show you why I find PDFs to be problematic, and I don't recommend using them, but I know sometimes we have data in PDF, so I'll show you what that looks like anyways. So I'll start with text. And then I made us a little Dedoose demo folder. So I downloaded some podcast transcripts. So I wanted to show you that you can do it from both like a web page and from a Word document. So I have a StoryCorps of a Word document, a Freakonomics, another web page, and another Word document. So you can usually select multiple, press open, and it will do them all at once. Sometimes it takes a minute to process. And then they show up here. We could just take a look at one. I believe this was one of the HTML, so it has some junk in it, but you see it shows up as a pretty normal text file. And then here's what a Word doc looks like. Also a pretty standard Word document. So I'm going to show you that PDF now as well, just so you can see what that looks like. So we have This American Life. Okay, so here's the PDF. It shows it almost more like an image file. So you can select text to code it, but when you code it, it codes it kind of like an image altogether. And you also have to turn the page. So if you happen to have something that you wanted to be an excerpt that started on page 1 but ended on page 2, I haven't found a way to bridge across pages. So I highly recommend against using PDFs unless you're doing more of an image-based coding process. That's not something I have experience doing. So,
and just so you know, this
of my
is one of
comfort
those
zone.
things that Dedoose talks about updating in the future. They kind of recognize that it's almost like a beta tool.
Yeah. The next thing I wanted to show was importing a code book. I'll show you what it looks like in the Excel file first. As Imogen and Ariana mentioned, there's kind of a wonky template that not wonky, unusual. That they require you to use if you want to upload a code book from Excel. So it has, as I believe Imogen was explaining, this nesting system. So I made a fake code called motivations that I wanted to be nested as a child code underneath life changes. So I had to put in the parent ID of motivations is the ID of life changes. And then the depth is 1 because it's a child code. If something were to be a grandchild code, the depth is 2. And then the parent ID would be the child code's ID that it's a grandchild under. I find the logic to be a bit convoluted, but once you, as Ariana said, once you've gone through it once, it makes sense. So this is the Excel file I'm going to upload into Dedoose to do like an all-in-one codebook upload. So I'm again going to go to the plus button by codes. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to do the exclamation mark, and then I'm going to import codes. This is that demo codebook I just showed you. It gives you a little preview to make sure this is what you meant to do, and then you submit. I usually do it once. I notice I've made mistakes. I haven't nested something correctly. I delete it, I fix it, and then usually the second time it works. So I pre-vetted this one. It's not always that smooth on the first try. So then now you'll see that I have this, just for the sake of showing, I have this one grandparent code, child code, grandchild code. Did that a couple ways, and all the other ones are just regular parent codes. You can drag and drop codes into Dedoose if you wanted to move them around. It's great if you're still in a place where you're sorting out your codebook and trying different things. If you have a final codebook and it happens by accident, it can be an unpleasant surprise. So a warning there to be careful about that. That's the basics of populating like the bare essentials of a project. I wanted to now, if you're brand new to Dedoose, also show you how to code in Dedoose. So let's just start with
Mary Kate, can I just interrupt you quickly, because I'm wondering if you could just demonstrate how to add codes using the plus button, because I'm not sure how many people would go through doing the Excel sheet. I probably would not. I think others would, but just for the sake of
adding them within Dedoose is super easy. You add the button, we can just title it test code, test description, and then you click submit. And it should show up. It's right there. So, yeah, and then as you'll notice, if you hover over a code, the description just pops up in a little that little yellow box. Does that answer your question, Kim? Okay.
Yeah, I just want people to know that it can be very easy to.
It is very
work
easy.
Within the system, and you don't need to use Excel to build your codebook and import your codebook.
Yeah, for us, we oftentimes develop a codebook in like a Word document, so it's easy to put it in Excel with like all the descriptions and then just upload it. But if you're starting your codebook development within Dedoose, I agree, it would be far easier to do it this way. So I want to show coding of a document. So you'll see that once you open up a media file, your codebook shows up here on the bottom right. The way you would start coding, as I believe in NVivo, is you just start highlighting. Then you want to, whatever the highlighted text is, you want to turn it into an excerpt. I think you can do it by right-clicking and then doing add code. You have this pop-up codebook that shows up that I really like. It floats around. It also, if you're just in the text and you press the space bar, it will pop up as well. And then you can either code from here or from over here. If your codebook is long, they oftentimes won't fit in the space and you can't resize it. So the quick code widget becomes incredibly useful. You can make it bigger and you can move it around so you can see usually your whole code. At least I usually find that I can see my whole code book at once. So you can code, then while this is red, it means that this excerpt is selected. You can then apply codes by double clicking on them from either of these two places, or you can take them from here and drag and drop them up there.
Also, what I do often, instead of resizing my code book, I quick type. So where you right now, I use that all the time.
Nice.
Quick type, and then I think you press enter.
Yeah. So once that happens, you'll see all the codes that you want to have applied show up here. And they also, if you hover over that bracket on next to the excerpt, you should see them all there. Another thing we wanted to show you was if you make an excerpt and then you're keep reading and you're like, oh wait, I actually, these same codes apply to the next lines as well. How do you extend it without having to delete it and start over? So you have to make sure that the excerpt you want to change the length of is selected. So it should be highlighted in green and it should be this red color up here. Sometimes if you've selected out of it, the excerpt you want to work with will change color, or you won't see red up here, and that means you're not in the right place. So you want to go back into the excerpt you're working with, and then say I want my excerpt to actually end here. I'll right click after yeah, and then I'll click set excerpt end, and it will just expand the whole excerpt down to there, and it saves a lot of time. Adding memos. I add memos by hovering over the bracket. Actually, I don't think, and then I just click add memo. We don't have any memo groups set up in these demo projects. If they are already set up, you can click here, and then the pre-existing memo groups will show here, and you can select one of them that you want to add your memo to. If you want to start a new memo group, you can just type it in. And then it starts the title of your memo. It just pre-populates it with the first bit of text from the excerpt. So usually I rename them into something that's a bit more indicative of what I want the memo to be around, like about. And then I write my memo here. And then I save it. If you then want to find your memos, you can go into that memo pop-up window. It shows you the name of your memo groups here. And like Ariana or Imogen said, I can't remember, they look like little sticky notes. The last thing I wanted to talk about was filtering coded data. Before I do that, is there questions about uploading media, uploading code books, coding, and memoing?
Did you show the right click of the memo? I've been trying to do other things and add people.
Sorry, say that again.
Did you show when you're on an excerpt, you can actually right click to add a memo? Did you just show that?
That's how yeah,
okay.
That is how I showed it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just a note, Mary-Kate, after you show the filtering, would you mind going to the settings to show how to add a new user to the project?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
So filtering, demoing filtering would be nicer if we had a few more things coded first. So I'm just gonna, well, we can see. So this has coded rewards, barriers, and critical points. Okay, so let's go to excerpts, and it shows that we only have one excerpt created in the entire project. Once you're done coding, you'll probably have hundreds of them. You can filter by using this drop-down menu to find the codes that you want to filter for. So say I want to run a code report of everything that's coded as rewards. I would click this rewards button. And then I go down here to the filters for rewards. And so every time you check a code up here, it will then show up down here with true and false. So you can include and exclude code. So if I want to see if I'm running a rewards code report, I'll do rewards true, and it will show me my one excerpt that I have coded as true. If I want to exclude rewards from my code report, I can click false, and it won't show me any excerpts that have rewards coded there. I don't have anything coded as actually. So this excerpt we coded as both rewards and barriers. So if I click rewards and barriers, it should still show up. But if I say I want rewards true, but barriers false, it'll disappear because barriers are coded on that excerpt. And I'm telling it I don't want to see anything where barriers are coded. I would recommend in our next demo section, if you have time, go into a transcript or a bunch of transcripts in your project and just make random excerpts and then play around with the filtering to get a sense of when it works, like how the yes and no system works. And then lastly, adding users. So this is under the security button. So right now we have 4 users in this project. You'll add users, and right now you can have different types of users. So if somebody, I think particularly because of the danger of reorganizing the code book by accident, if somebody doesn't need editing access to a project, I'll give them viewer status just to reduce the error or the potential for mistakes with something like rearranging the code book. The one user group Dedoose default offers you is this full access, which gives every user the ability to do anything. So you use this selected group and then just put in somebody's email address. It will tell you, I contacted a few of you who I was trying to add to projects and your email address wasn't found. So if somebody doesn't have a Dedoose account, it will tell you this person doesn't have a Dedoose account. If they have a Dedoose account, Maria, I'm going to use you as guinea pig. It says user was found, invite to project, and you say yes. You can add different types of user groups. They have some pre-made options here with different types of access if you want to tailor who can do what within your project. Is there anything else I can go ahead and show while we're looking at this?
Let's see. Mary Kate, there's a question about how you export a code report to a Word document. Would you mind showing that? And then I think it would be great afterward if we just get everyone started in Dedoose.
Yeah.
Do a little, have an opportunity for everyone to try these things out on their own.
I'm just going to code a few things, make us a few fake excerpts so that we have something to export.
So while you're doing that, Katie Woodruff, you had a question, or you wanted to know more about descriptors. So if you have specific questions, let us know. And while people are playing around in their demos, we can walk through something too.
Yeah. So for a code report, I just made 3 random excerpts that are coded as resilience. So I'm going to export a resilience code report. So I'm going to go to excerpts. I'm going to filter for resilience. So I clicked that resilience button under codes. Now it shows up here. I drop down and I say true. So I only want those 3 excerpts where I coded resilience. I say select all and export. They can export, or they can add a lot of metadata to that excerpts that you export. I have a particular way I like to do it that makes sense to me. I find a lot of this I don't need while I'm reading a code report. It makes no difference to me. I use the range to just help be an identifier so I can like name where that excerpt started. I want the media title because I usually want to know the participant ID or what kind of, data source it is. And then sometimes I'll do code applications if I want to know what else is coded there, and oftentimes I don't. And that's it. I do it, I do the order as, I do media. If you do media, it comes out in the order. If it's multiple excerpts from the same transcript, it will order them in the order that they are in the transcript. Sometimes people do it by user. If you want to look how one user coded and then you want to look how another user coded. Or if you have minimal brain space and want to start with the shorter ones, you can do it by size and save your brain space for when you have the bandwidth to look at longer excerpts. I do excerpt full. I actually haven't played around with what it means to do if you do the none or shorter. I'm not sure. And I always do it into a Word document.
Just one thing, they do sort of, Dedoose does sort of prefer Excel exporting, I found. We don't use it that often, but every once in a while, like if you end up using code weighting, the Excel file might be really useful and you can like sort it that way. Or there's other sort of functionality because it comes out in an Excel file. I think we find it quite clunky to actually read the excerpts that way, but it could be a way to look at descriptors a certain way. If you have a smaller, we also tend to have really large sample sizes, and so it gets a little clunky. But anyway, that you can do quite a bit for Excel depending on your project.
So I'll just show you what that code report for those 3 excerpts looks like. So this is that title, the media title I told them I wanted. And this is the excerpt range. And then this is the text of the excerpt. And so there's 1, 2, and 3. I sometimes will go through just to help me when I have a ton to go through, I'll do some like find and replaces. And so I'll do every time it says title, I'll find and replace with title in bold. Oops, I did something wrong. So this just helps me visually if I'm reading through like a 60-page document. I really like having visual cues like where my excerpts end. And there's a few other things I'll do to make it easy, just like quick find and replace things. But I think everybody has their personal preferences on how to do that.
That's a great tip. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Imogen, should we transition?
Yeah, I think now is a great time. We have, I think, just over 20 minutes left. So now's a good time for everyone to open up Dedoose. When you go to your projects page, you will see our demo project listed there. If for some reason you open up Dedoose and it doesn't show, you might need to just sign out of Dedoose quickly and then sign in again. That seems to work for someone. And I think we've added everyone to one of a couple of different projects. We didn't want Dedoose to be too bogged down or slow by too many users. Let us know either by turning on your mic or adding in the chat box if you don't see the project there, and we'll try to troubleshoot and add you to it. And then I see also that there's a comment about descriptors from Casey, and how you can add a range of descriptors to your project. I'm going to type back to you now with a little bit more information, but I also recommend that if you just want to go into the descriptors tab and see what the options are there, that's a great way to kind of try it out and see whether this is going to be, whether this will fit your project needs. As people are looking through the project in Dedoose, if questions come up and you want to go through something step by step with us, you can share your screen or just turn on your mic. We can make this kind of an interactive session. Otherwise, we'll let everyone explore and just chime in with questions as you have them.
And I see there was also, Kim, you want to talk about waiting? Give me 1 second, and then I will try to answer that question. So for waiting, I don't know if you saw it because the chat was moving so quickly, but I did send so Dedoose has their user guide, which is super, super helpful. And then they also actually have a blog, which also has some great tips. And I sent you something in there. The waiting is kind of whatever you want to make it. So it's a way to add either I mean, literally wait. So you could say, you could make a code, say, you know, this is let's say the code is impact or something, like impact on their life. You could have a weight that's high or low or something like that. One way that we used it in a project, and we've used it, I think, only once or twice, so I will admit that we've used it sparingly. We used it one time when we asked participants to choose on a trajectory map that we had created. There was sort of 5 options, and we asked them in the qualitative interview which place on this trajectory they thought they were at, and we used the code weighting. So during those conversations, we coded what trajectory level they chose, and it was like, you know, A, B, C, or D, but we changed that into 1, 2, 3, or 4, and so then we could actually stratify later on based on people who had responded to which level. But Dedoose makes it clear, like, you can kind of make it work for you. So it's quite flexible, and depending, you can get a little creative with it.
Thank you. Really helpful.
I'm catching up with all the questions that were in the chat. There's so many it's good learnings for us, what we should anticipate, and next time we do a training about what needs to be said.
Jennifer, I'm not fully understanding your question. Can you ask it live?
Yeah, sure. So when I use Atlas, the different people who are coding, like, we all code and then we look through it and then we come to a decision about which of the codes we agree upon. But it sounds like in Dedoose that everybody has their, like, live coding at the same time because they're all able to do it, you know, on the cloud. And so I guess I'm confused what happens when you print out the excerpts and at what point you do the, like, at what point you decide on the final code.
Yeah, great question. And I guess we didn't talk about when you're starting a code book, there's a few different ways, or did you talk about it? Sorry, I was like doing the chat. Okay, good. There's a few different ways when you're creating a code book to do it in Dedoose, and we've done it quite a few different ways, I guess. So there's document blinding, where you can actually, everyone is working in the same document, but you can blind yourself to what the other coders are doing. I guess it doesn't blind you to the code book, but it does blind you to how they're adding them to the code. You can also clone a document. So if you upload one transcript and then you clone it and you make a copy, and then you can send your coders to code those different copies, then you can get those into Word and then do like a compare. We often do like a longer meeting, when you look at what people created. And so you can have a longer discussion there and then make your decision. And you can either, you can do that in like a test project, which I've done in the past. And then that way that's like sort of your messy project. And then you can create a new project once you're ready to go. Or you can just clean up that project, like delete the test ones that you did and clean up your code book, and that kind of either way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I don't know how to do, obviously, like some of the steps that you're describing, like cloning or deleting everything that's in a document that's been coded. So I don't know how to do all those steps. And then so that made sense about the code book. Was really helpful. But the second piece of that is still when you have different coders coding using the same code book, once the code book is stable, but applying the codes differently. At what point do you guys look, like where are you looking on this at, like where everybody has coded different things? And then do you decide before you print it out, like which of those you agree with, or do you just print out everybody's different codes? Like their 10% difference or whatever, that you've agreed on is what you're going to use.
I'm not sure if, Mary Kate, do you understand what she said?
I think I don't fully understand. And I think part of the mismatch is that we've changed the way we think about comparing between coders since we've moved to Dedoose. Like Ariana, I think when we in NVivo, when we would have two coders code an entire transcript, we would run like the ICR, we would figure out where the difference was. And then within that transcript, you could figure out like where two coders coded differently. But in Dedoose, that's because we use, if we're trying to get an IRR score because we want to be able to put it in a manuscript, or because that's how we're shaping our conversations around intercoder consistency, we use that IRR tool, which isn't really transcript based, it's excerpt based. So you can choose different excerpts from different transcripts. And then the tool itself shows you, like when the person taking the test took it, how they agreed with the person who made the test. So it's more of like a 2x2 table. I think it's a really different way of thinking about it in Dedoose, if I'm understanding your question correctly.
You are understanding it correctly. But that is where I'm trying to figure out in terms of workflow, how to use this, because I just can't figure out.
Yeah. One thing we've done in a recent project where we were not interested in using the IRR tool within Dedoose is we did a really different process where we exported coded transcripts from one coder to a Word document. And like I was saying before, when you do that, the excerpt shows up in like a comment bubble, and in the comment bubble, it lists out the codes applied. So we kind of blinded it. So the reviewer would go through the Word document and they could see where the excerpt chunks are. And they would kind of put in a word bubble what they would have coded there. And then we just visually looked at the comment bubbles and compared like what the two different people would have coded. I found that to be pretty logistically easy. In a Dedoose transcript, within Dedoose, you can have two people code the same transcript. You could then export all the coding to Excel. And I've done this, I think, once before. It was a really complicated process of like sorting Excel columns to see where agreement and disagreement were, and like color coding. I didn't find it to be as elegant as when we used to work in NVivo and did a similar process.
Got it. So
sorry.
It sounds like exporting it and blinding who made those codes and having someone else go through it and decide, be like the third person to decide which ones you're going to stick with and what you're going to code. And then you go back and have to delete the one that you guys disagreed with.
Yeah.
And we'll sometimes do it live in a meeting. So for that, there's different ways you can do it. You know, you can kind of decide on your workflow process, but if you're discussing it in a meeting, it's just easier to do it in Word and write comment bubbles to each other. But one person can have it kind of live, the person who coded, and can be making those changes once agreements are made. But we also, I will say that we do sometimes go back and let's say we've made like a really important clarification to a code and we realize, you know, some people have been coding it one way and the other. We will say like, okay, go back to your last, you know, 5 coded transcripts and adjust. You can pull a report of just those codes that you've coded, and you can make adjustments there.
Where can you pull that report?
Yeah.
You can do it in filtering. You can filter by user and by code in that excerpts tab, and it'll just show as a list of the excerpts with that code applied by that user. And then you open them up and the first one pops up as like a little pop-up window, and then you can just click through. You can go next, 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 and go through them all.
Yeah, I was going to say we use code reports, but we're really talking about filtering in Dedoose. It's just a different language. They don't really have what NVivo had in terms of reports. You basically can filter the data in all sorts of different ways depending on what you put into your project, and then that's how you get the information that you want. And then you can export it into Word or Excel. And Kim, to answer your question about what we do, yeah, that one, the code co-occurrence is probably the analysis chart that we use the most.
Great.
And
yeah.
I was going to offer, I also have a different slide deck that I can show
You do?
really quickly to
Great.
give a few, I don't know how much time we have, but if this is helpful.
8 minutes. I do think the visualization is useful for people to know about. I also think it's important to know that some of what you're seeing is kind of an artifact of your interview guide, the questions that you ask, whether you're using, you know, a priori deductive codes. So sometimes the patterning that you see is not that meaningful, and you would just, of course, you'd expect to see a lot of code, you know, of a lot of excerpts associated with a particular code. So I guess I'm saying be careful with them too.
Yeah, can you all see my screens now? So yeah, so this is the code co-occurrence, an example of what we've used. You were just showing that. We love it. It's a heat map. So it's just really visually like eye-catching when you want to see which codes overlap the most, which ones you're coding together the most. And then this is one. So again, the projects we created are a demo project. We don't have descriptors in there. So you'll see more once you add, as Kim was saying. So this is an example of a project that Liz was the PI on. And it gives you, so based on the descriptors you put in, it's a nice visual. Sometimes I can see like we had this residual drug level category. So we can see we were quite, you know, where those lie, where the participants, which category they were in. Some of them are a little less useful because of the way that Dedoose reads the numbers. Like PTID is obviously not that useful, but site. So this is kind of a cool one too. Like we have different sites. And so just, it's kind of visually, and then if you click on them, it'll give you a little bit more details. Also, I think a lot of these are really designed for mixed methods, and we don't use Dedoose for more than, for like really much quantitative, except for basic demographic. So you could, if you have a project where you want to do more quant stuff in Dedoose, these have quite a lot more capabilities there. Sorry, hold on. Fire truck going by. I was gonna go back a few if people wanted to see. This is sort of to answer your question about memoing in terms of analysis. Sorry, I'm gonna make you dizzy for a second. We use that excerpt range that number a lot. And so that's a way that you can kind of know what excerpt you're talking about, because there's no way in the memos in Dedoose, unfortunately, to like if you're wanting to create one memo that has information from a bunch of different excerpts, you can definitely attach one memo to multiple excerpts, but then in the memo itself, there's no way to like link your words to which excerpt you're talking about. So the way that we got around that was we pay attention very closely. So this is like our participant ID and then like underscore and that first excerpt range number. It's a little clunky, but it's one of our workarounds that we've used so that we can know kind of more specifically what we're looking at.
I see. When you're in the project, but when you export code reports, the memos pop up with the associated excerpt.
Yeah, they always do. So that's one thing that, like this is actually an example of a table. Like I said, if you wanted to use Excel, this is what it looks like. And we reformatted a little bit, but the excerpt range will always come up with your data. That's something that I guess it's in the options. I guess technically you could tell it not to, but just always include it. And then you have that information. And then, so this is an example, like when we're writing our information into Word, we're taking what we had from Dedoose, then we can still sort of like track which excerpt it came from. Oops, sorry.
And then once you're if you're in a transcript, like if you want to go back and find like a specific quote or something, if you have the participant ID or something and the name of that memo and then the range, you can find the media, open it up, and then there's like a search function and you can search for the range identifier and it'll take you right to that excerpt in the transcript.
Allie, oh, okay, you had another question about the code overlapping. Did you want to ask that? Or is that being discussed in the chat still? There's so much happening in the chat, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I can talk.
Sorry, go ahead with the
Sorry, it's going to interrupt.
This is about overlapping.
Yeah, we have a project that we ended up to choose the same code, different codes for the same part of the text. So that means like a lot of overlap between this code and the other code. So if you're saying it's better not to have any overlap between the codes, so we may end up to produce a separate code like that includes code 1 and code 2, but only applies to the text that relevant to those codes. So is that a good idea, or how we can make that happen?
I think our caution, oh, go ahead, Imogen.
I was just going to say exactly what you were about to say. What we caution against is overlapping excerpts rather than codes. So you can create one excerpt by highlighting the text that you want to apply codes to and apply as many codes as are relevant to that piece of text. But as Ariana is showing here, you don't want to overlap two highlighted pieces of text. That would be like if you had already highlighted this bit in green, and then you also wanted to highlight another part of it that you've already coded and keep highlighting the text beneath it, you would have two excerpts that overlap with one another. Am I making sense?
Yeah, there's a special term for that in other, like in Atlas. It's a within. I mean, within coding, within is okay, but going across to excerpts. So if you wanted to code line 35 to 40, that's a problem, right? Because you're going to overlap with those two distinct excerpts. But if you want to code 33 to 36, is that should be okay, right?
It's okay. It's more just to get it twice. I think that's what, yeah.
Okay.
So you just have to, it just depends on how you want to do your analysis. I mean, that's the thing we've learned the most. It's like, you can make it work for you. And Mary Kate, like she said, if you wanted to, if not overlapping just doesn't work for you and you're okay recognizing that you're going to read sections multiple times, then go for it. Like there's no rule book that says you can't do that. We've just found for our team, again, we often have really big data sets, and it's just it's too much of rereading the same text. But I did want to show you, Ali, like, so here you can see like join and remain come up on these two, and they're separate because, you know, even though that code comes up in both of these excerpts, they're also about different things. So, but when you run this join and remain code, I guess what you're saying is you wanted to run like, I'm trying to see if another one overlaps. Like, let's say join and remain and opinion passed overtime was also in the second range. You could pull a report that was basically showing both of those, or you could filter your data so you could see those together, if that makes sense.
We are
Thank you.
right at the top of the hour and coming on this complicated issue. I can't thank the three of you enough. I mean, right? Can we all just applaud you all? This is fantastic. You each brought expertise. So great that three of you had different ways of telling us the same things. Thank you so much.